It started with a shriek. Not a word, not a sentence, just a raw, piercing scream that shattered the airwaves like a glass slammed against marble. Kellyanne Conway, seated in a pristine white blazer, jabbed her finger across the table and let loose on live television. Her voice cracked with fury. "You don't even know what you're talking about, Congresswoman. You're a disgrace to this institution." The studio gasped. Audibly. Cameras swiveled in confusion. One of the panelists dropped their pen. The anchor blinked twice, frozen in place, unsure whether to intervene or let the chaos roll. But the woman on the other end of the table, Representative Jasmine Crockett, didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just stared. At that moment, America stopped breathing. The clip would be replayed hundreds of thousands of times in the next 24 hours, but the live audience witnessed something else entirely. Not just a clash of political opinion, but an earthquake of generational energy, cultural defiance, and unspoken rage that had been building for years. Jasmine's silence spoke volumes. She didn't meet fire with fire. She met it with granite. The kind of calm you only learn from living under pressure. Across social media, it started instantly. "Did y'all see that look? Jasmine's silence is louder than Kellyanne's scream. This is what dignity looks like." But in the moment, live and unfiltered, the tension clung to the air like smoke after an explosion. No teleprompter could have predicted this. No PR team could spin it. It wasn't just a debate. It was a cultural reckoning unfolding in real time. And Jasmine? Still silent, still breathing, still waiting, because what she said next wouldn't just shift the mood in the studio. It would light up every phone in America. It would turn outrage into inspiration. It would make history. But no one expected what Jasmine would do next. The show had been billed as just another roundtable, an ordinary political segment lost in the noise of cable commentary. But this wasn't ordinary. Not this time. The cameras were live. The chyron glowed beneath their faces. And on the screen, across the country, millions were watching. Some leaning in with popcorn, others clenching their fists, scrolling, screen recording, waiting for the moment. That would break the internet. Kellyanne Conway knew the game. She'd played it before. Countless times. Combative, smirking, always a half-second away from a jab wrapped in a grin. For years, she had dominated studio spaces through sheer volume, by bulldozing nuance and weaponizing the clock. Every interruption was a tactic. Every dig was intentional. She wasn't there to debate. She was there to conquer. Jasmine Crockett, by contrast, played a different game entirely. A lawyer by training. A public servant by calling. No theatrics, no yelling. Just that trademark calm, the kind that speaks louder than any scream. When she entered the studio, she didn't bring sound. She brought silence, gravity, precision. To producers, it seemed like inspired booking. Old guard versus new voice. Status quo versus change. But they hadn't fully grasped what they'd engineered. This wasn't just a political clash. It was a generational collision. A battle between the loudest voice in the room and the clearest one. It was the face of past privilege barking across the table at a woman who had climbed every step, earned every inch, and arrived with nothing but facts and fire behind her eyes. And for the audience, it wasn't just entertainment. It was recognition. It was vindication. It was watching someone who looked like them, sounded like them, hold her ground not with fury, but with presence. Kellyanne thought she'd rattle her, thought she'd dominate the airtime, control the tone, bait Jasmine into slipping. But Crockett wasn't there to play defense. She was there to represent. And that alone changed everything. Every second they sat at that table, the stakes rose. This wasn't just about one disagreement. It was about who gets to define the narrative, who gets to be seen as angry and who gets to be called passionate, who interrupts and still gets respect, and who speaks calmly and still gets dismissed. On TikTok, people were already screen capturing Jasmine's stillness. On Twitter, clips were surfacing from Kellyanne's past meltdowns, forming a digital side-by-side of chaos versus composure. What was supposed to be a panel discussion had turned into a mirror, and the country was staring at its reflection. But the stage was set for something no one in the studio could control. Long before the scream echoed across that studio, Kellyanne Conway had already mastered the art of political combat. She didn't rise through Washington by charm or cooperation. She rose by turning every camera into a battlefield. Where others saw interviews, she saw arenas. Where others waited to speak, she interrupted, redirected, twisted, and spun. A seasoned strategist with a law degree and an unmatched talent for deflection, she had become one of the most recognizable faces in the country during one of its most chaotic chapters. As the architect of alternative facts and the queen of circular logic, Conway didn't argue to win. She argued to exhaust. She would smile as she cut deep, laugh as she lied. Her brilliance wasn't in what she said. It was in how confidently she said it, even when it made no sense at all. And she loved the chaos, thrived in it. Because confusion was power, and power was survival. Her press appearances became viral not for their clarity, but for their audacity. She could dodge a question, twist a quote, and repackage an outrage into a soundbite so slippery it slid right off the truth. She didn't need to be right. She just needed to be louder, faster, more relentless than whoever sat across from her. But in recent years, something had shifted. The old tactics didn't land like they used to. The same old smirks felt forced. The interruptions felt desperate. And the audience, once easily distracted, had changed. People were tired. Tired of the noise. Tired of the games. Tired of being talked over. Still, Kellyanne held firm. She was a veteran of this war. She had walked the halls of the White House, delivered spin on the steps of the Capitol, turned press briefings into performance art. She knew how to dominate airtime, and when producers booked her for this particular panel, she showed up ready to do exactly that. But what she didn't expect was who would be sitting opposite her. Jasmine Crockett wasn't a cable news regular. She didn't trade in sensationalism. She wasn't there to throw punches. She was there to speak truth, which made her dangerous in a different way. Kellyanne could handle fire. She couldn't handle stillness. That day in the studio, Kellyanne came armed with every trick in her playbook. She came to bait, to provoke, to unravel. The volume was part of the strategy. The interruptions were deliberate. The scream? Calculated chaos. A final attempt to regain control of a moment that was quietly slipping away from her. But the scream didn't land. It ricocheted, bounced back, exposed her. Because what once felt like strength now felt hollow, outdated, almost desperate. It was as if the audience could see through it all, see the theater behind the outrage, the choreography behind the chaos. And in that moment, Conway's weapon of choice, her voice, felt more like a weakness than a strength, because across the table sat someone who wasn't playing by the old rules. Jasmine Crockett didn't come up through backroom deals or elite institutions. She wasn't groomed for cable news, nor was she built for polished punditry. She was forged in something far less glamorous and far more real. Courtrooms where nobody was watching, communities where justice wasn't guaranteed, and streets where silence too often meant survival. Born in St. Louis and raised in the heart of working-class America, Jasmine didn't inherit a platform. She earned every inch of it. The daughter of everyday people who taught her the value of service before success, she chose law not to build a resume, but to protect those who couldn't afford to defend themselves. In a world where most people learn the law to manipulate it, Jasmine learned it to fight it, to bend it back toward fairness, toward humanity. Her early days as a public defender in Dallas weren't filled with press conferences or applause. They were filled with exhausted eyes, impossible odds, and the quiet, unspoken weight of representing someone who had already been judged by the system long before stepping into court. But Jasmine never flinched. She sat with mothers who couldn't afford bail. She stood up for teenagers railroaded by plea deals. She fought for fairness in places most people had forgotten. And through it all, she developed something rare in American politics: a moral compass that didn't spin when the cameras turned on. Her rise to Congress wasn't part of a master plan. It was a response to injustice, to neglect, to the idea that voices like hers were only allowed at the table if they whispered. But Jasmine wasn't going to whisper. She didn't need to shout either. Her presence alone made people listen. Where Kellyanne's power was built on projection, on appearing invincible even when cracking, Jasmine's came from truth. Truth she'd seen. Truth she'd lived. Truth that didn't need to be exaggerated because the facts were already powerful enough. When she speaks, it's not to win an argument. It's to reveal one. To make plain what others try to obscure. On the Hill, she's known not for theatrics, but for unshakable composure and directness that lands like a gavel. No flourish, no dodge, just clarity. And that's what made her dangerous to people like Kellyanne. Because Jasmine doesn't play political theater. She refuses the script entirely. She didn't come from legacy. She came from labor. She doesn't deflect with snark. She disarms with facts. And most threatening of all, she doesn't need to be liked to be respected. In a political era obsessed with going viral, Jasmine Crockett wasn't chasing attention. Attention found her, because authenticity is magnetic in a world drowning in performance. By the time she stepped into that studio, she wasn't just a congresswoman. She was a symbol for the daughters of overlooked neighborhoods, for the public defenders who walk into courtrooms outnumbered, for every young black woman who's been told to calm down when she's already speaking calmly. That day, when she faced down Kellyanne's fury, she didn't see a political foe. She saw an old playbook, worn thin from overuse. She saw the final act of a strategy built on fear and flash. And she knew something Conway didn't. She didn't have to raise her voice to be heard. She just had to stay still. Because power doesn't always come from noise. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly who you are, even as someone tries to scream you out of your own name. Jasmine Crockett had walked through storms bigger than a cable news tirade. She'd been underestimated more times than she could count. And every time she responded the same way. Not with rage, not with retreat, but with truth. And it was that calm strength that would soon flip the script. The moderator had barely finished. The question when Kellyanne lunged. It's typical, absolutely typical, for the left to ignore the facts, she spat, slicing the air with her hand like she was swatting away the very idea of reason. You sit there pretending to care about law and order while your policies tear this country apart. Her voice didn't rise. It launched. The studio lights reflected off her expression, caught somewhere between rage and performance. The other panelists tensed in their seats, unsure if they should lean in or brace for impact. Across the table, Jasmine Crockett remained still. No eye roll, no exhale. Just focus. Kellyanne's voice cracked slightly, pushing harder. What do you even do in Congress? Besides chase cameras and play victim when someone calls you out. Jasmine blinked once. Nothing more. The moderator shifted awkwardly. One of the anchors began to raise a hand in protest but froze, caught between professionalism and the wildfire now consuming the table. Kellyanne kept going. You represent a district that's falling apart, and you want to lecture me about service? I've been in the White House. I've worked in real politics, not hashtags and Twitter threads. She emphasized each word like it was a hammer meant to break through Crockett's composure. But nothing cracked. And that silence? It wasn't weakness. It was fuel. Kellyanne's frustration boiled. The louder she got, the quieter Jasmine became. The less reaction she gave, the more unhinged her opponent appeared. The studio audience felt it. You could see the shift. The crossed arms, the raised eyebrows, the phones discreetly lifted to record. The energy was turning, slowly, unmistakably. Camera 2 zoomed in on Jasmine's face. Serene, locked in. Camera 3 panned to Kellyanne's, flushed and twitching with irritation. Split-screen drama. On Twitter, the first wave had already started. Jasmine's face is everything. She's letting Kellyanne implode herself. This silence is tactical brilliance. Kellyanne leaned in now, her finger jabbing inches from Jasmine's space. Do you have anything to say? Anything at all? Or are you just here for the optics? A pause. A breathless pause. The kind of pause that, in another timeline, might have been filled with panic or defensiveness, but not here. Jasmine's eyes met hers, not with fury but with finality. The kind of stare that says, "You've already lost. You just don't know it yet." And still, she said nothing. The silence expanded, wrapped around the room, amplified by the contrast. It was louder than any scream. Kellyanne recoiled slightly, the jab losing steam mid-sentence. She turned toward the moderator, but the control she once held had slipped somewhere into the space between her last insult and Jasmine's first word, because it hadn't come yet. Jasmine still hadn't spoken, but she was about to. And when she did, the internet would never forget it. The silence was thunderous. Kellyanne sat back in her chair, arms folded, still writing. The aftershock of her last outburst, waiting, half smirking, half daring Jasmine to respond. Her foot tapped under the table. Her eyes darted toward the anchor, toward the cameras, then back to Jasmine, expecting the usual. Defensiveness, frustration, noise. But Jasmine didn't blink. She simply inhaled. Not a sigh, not exhaustion. A breath of preparation. One the entire room seemed to take with her. Then, finally, softly but unshakably, she spoke. "Ms. Conway," she began, her voice as steady as a gavel. "If you're done yelling, I'd love to introduce you to something called facts." Kellyanne's smirk froze. Jasmine continued, unbothered. "You worked in the White House during an administration that handed America over to chaos. You told us lies until we couldn't recognize the truth without squinting. And now, you're here shouting about credibility?" A chuckle rippled through the panel. It wasn't loud, just enough to shift the room's center of gravity. Jasmine didn't look up. She was locked in. "You said I only deal in hashtags and Twitter threads, that I haven't done anything in Congress." She nodded slowly. "Let's talk about that." She turned to the anchor. "I've passed bills that support veterans in my district. I've fought to expand Medicaid in underserved communities. I sit in hearings where I'm the only person asking questions that make certain folks uncomfortable, but they need to be asked." Then back to Kellyanne. "You talk over people. You interrupt. You posture. But when was the last time you actually listened to someone who didn't agree with you?" The cameras zoomed in. Kellyanne's jaw clenched, ever so slightly. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table. Jasmine didn't flinch. "You say you've been in the White House? Congratulations. Power doesn't make you right, and it doesn't make you righteous. It just makes your lies louder." The audience murmured louder now. One clap, then another. It built like a slow wave. But Jasmine didn't pause for applause. She had more. "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to represent. To make space for the people you like to talk about but never talk to. The ones who don't get invited onto these panels. The ones who get judged by the volume of their voice instead of the truth of their words." Kellyanne opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Jasmine kept going. "You scream because silence terrifies you. But I'm not afraid of quiet. I've spent my life in quiet places. Courtrooms where no one listens. Hospitals where families wait for news they can't afford. Communities where the only time we see a camera is when something terrible happens. Now, she leaned in slightly. Not aggressive, but purposeful. I've seen what power does when it doesn't care. I've seen what it looks like when people yell instead of serve. And I've made a choice. Not to match the noise, but to challenge it. Not with chaos, but with clarity. The room erupted. Applause, loud and sustained, filled the studio like a storm breaking. One of the panelists actually mouthed, "Wow." The moderator sat frozen for a moment, then tried to recompose, shuffling their notes as if that might somehow recapture the moment. Kellyanne stared, stunned, blinking too fast, her mouth twitching between a forced smile and a frown that never fully formed. Her power, so long rooted in dominance, disruption, volume, had evaporated in real time, and she knew it, because the applause wasn't just approval, it was recognition. For Jasmine, for what she represented, for everyone who had been told they needed to shout to be heard, and now saw that maybe, just maybe, they didn't. Within minutes, phones buzzed across the studio. Clips were already circulating. Snippets of Jasmine's response were being trimmed into Instagram Reels, subtitled TikToks, viral Twitter posts. Silence, screaming. Jasmine Crockett, ladies and gentlemen. Kellyanne just got dismantled. On her own turf. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar. In the control room, producers were whispering frantically, "Get that segment up ASAP. That's the opener now." It's blowing up already. Because something had shifted. The narrative, the momentum, the moment. This wasn't just another viral clip. It was a recalibration of the debate itself, of what power looked like, of who got to be heard, and how. Kellyanne sat quieter now, swallowing hard, nodding blankly as the moderator tried to regain control of the segment, but it was too late. She had screamed into silence, and silence had answered. Jasmine Crockett adjusted her mic, took another sip of water, and waited calmly as the cameras cut to commercial. But the real explosion didn't happen in the studio. It happened online. The broadcast hadn't even ended before Twitter caught fire. Within minutes, Jasmine's silence was trending nationwide. 10 minutes later, it hit global. Clips of the exchange flooded every social platform. One TikTok edit layered Jasmine's calm stare over an orchestral build-up, cutting just before her first words. Another set the moment to slow motion, adding the caption, "When grace walks into the room and ends the chaos without raising its voice." The quote that stuck was simple, but seismic. Power doesn't make you right. It just makes your lies louder. Instagram feeds filled with that line on black backgrounds, stylized in gold letters. Twitter threads dissected every beat of the takedown like it was a championship bout. The moment wasn't just viral. It was mythologized. Late-night hosts couldn't resist. Trevor Noah opened with, "I haven't seen someone dismantle a loud white conservative that calmly since Michelle Obama made an entire room cry with one sentence." Stephen Colbert quipped, "Jasmine Crockett just showed us that the most powerful microphone might be silence." Even celebrities jumped in. Kerry Washington tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett didn't just clap back, she redefined the conversation. Grace, strength, intelligence, icon." Meanwhile, Kellyanne Conway became a punchline. Memes exploded. A still of her mid-scream was paired with captions like, "When the Starbucks barista spells your name wrong again." Yelling louder doesn't make you the main character. Kellyanne. The Sound and the Fury, featuring zero facts. A parody Twitter account titled "R Silent Crockett" amassed 80,000 followers in 24 hours, tweeting nothing but calm, fact-based rebuttals to loud right-wing takes. The backlash wasn't cruel. It was clinical. Dissecting Conway's strategy, exposing its wear, its fatigue. Analysts called it the end of a political era where rage outshouted reason. Others dubbed Jasmine's moment a generational shift in televised discourse. Even politicians chimed in. Senator Raphael Warnock tweeted, "Sometimes the most radical act in America is staying calm while telling the truth. Thank you, A. Jasmine Flores." AOC reposted the clip with a fire emoji and the caption, "This is what leadership looks like." But it wasn't just the political class. It was the people. Educators used the clip in classrooms to illustrate emotional intelligence in public speaking. Community organizers played it at local rallies. A pastor in Detroit referenced Jasmine's moment in a Sunday sermon. "She showed us how to keep your soul in the spotlight." It spread beyond the internet. It echoed into living rooms, texty, threads, dinner tables. Parents showed their daughters. Lawyers nodded in quiet solidarity. Young people who had never watched political commentary before shared it on their stories with one word: respect, because it wasn't just what Jasmine said. It was how she made people feel, seen, validated, represented. In her silence, they found their dignity. In her words, they found their clarity. She became a symbol, not because she tried to, but because she didn't. Meanwhile, Conway retreated. No follow-up interviews, no clarifications. Her silence now rang differently, not poised, but defeated. For days, the moment remained untouched atop trending lists. News outlets labeled it the Crockett clip. It became a reference point, a cultural shorthand for the moment reason, outshined rage. And while the memes, jokes, and quotes flew like wildfire, something quieter was spreading underneath. A realization, barely spoken, but deeply felt, that dignity, even in the face of noise, is power. That silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. That clarity doesn't need to shout to cut through the fog. And in the middle of the chaos, a deeper lesson began to emerge. In a media landscape addicted to volume, where the loudest voice too often wins the room, Jasmine Crockett reminded the nation of something ancient, something sacred. Truth doesn't have to yell, her moment on live. Television wasn't just a political victory, it was a cultural course correction, a recalibration of what strength looks like. Where some saw restraint, others saw power. Where some expected fury, she offered focus. And where chaos demanded attention, Jasmine chose clarity. She didn't interrupt. She didn't over-explain. She didn't match energy with ego. She waited, and when she spoke, she didn't just counter a narrative, she shattered one. Because in that brief, unforgettable moment, Jasmine Crockett embodied something America often forgets to celebrate: the power of patience, the resilience of presence, the kind of leadership that doesn't grandstand but stands firm, that doesn't spin truth, but speaks it. She didn't just represent her district, she represented everyone who's ever been told to sit down, to lower their tone, to calm down when they were already calm. She represented the teacher who chooses her words carefully in a room full of noise. The young black woman passed over in meetings for being too composed. The immigrant father who keeps his head down and works twice as hard without ever raising his voice. The advocate who pushes for change in city council meetings with no cameras, no trending hashtags, just determination. Jasmine showed them all that dignity isn't the absence of power, it is power. And in doing so, she offered a quiet revolution. A revolution that said, you don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to perform to be remembered. And you don't have to win a moment to change a narrative. You just have to stand in your truth long enough for the noise to collapse under its own weight. Because Kellyanne Conway came into that studio with a strategy: create chaos, dominate airtime, drown the message. But Jasmine Crockett didn't come to play games. She came with service in her heart and truth on her side. And that combination, authentic, unbought, unmoved, is the very definition of American courage. In a time when the country is being pulled in every direction, by misinformation, by fear, by ego, her calm wasn't just a tactic. It was a stand. Stand for what politics could look like, what leadership should feel like, what Americanness still means when we strip away the noise, empathy, resilience, and clarity. So yes, Jasmine Crockett dismantled an entire strategy with a single moment. But more importantly, she reminded us of the kind of voice that actually carries through time. Because sometimes, the quietest voice is the loudest in history. Kellyanne Conway screamed. Jasmine Crockett went viral. But it wasn't just about a scream or a single viral clip. It was about what it revealed, who we amplify, who we ignore, and what kind of leadership we choose to elevate. One woman brought chaos, the other brought clarity, and in the end, it was composure that won the moment and captured the country. Because when the noise fades and the spin dies down, we remember the people who speak not to dominate, but to defend, not to distract, but to deliver. Jasmine Crockett didn't go viral because she fought back. She went viral because she didn't need to. Her dignity spoke louder than outrage ever could. Her truth outlasted the noise, and her presence became a message millions recognized. That we're not powerless in the face of arrogance. We just need to stop letting it speak for us. If that moment resonated with you, if you saw yourself, your family, your values in Jasmine's strength, then this is your movement too. Subscribe for more stories that cut through the chaos. Share this video if you believe dignity still matters. And comment below with the moments that made you believe calm can still be revolutionary, because this was never just one debate. It was America deciding who we really are.